Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. Trump and Powell meet on the economy, but the Federal Reserve is going to remain non-political, so they say. Let's explore this story with a healthy amount of skepticism. All right, this is from CNBC. And I heard the news this morning. I was kind of taken aback because, the president has been at odds with the Federal Reserve and has publicly stated so. Let's kind of take a look at what this story talks about and get an idea and see what we can take from the event here. President Donald Trump and Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who have been at odds over the direction of monetary policy, met on Monday to discuss a variety of economic issues. The two, along with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, discussed the economy broadly as well as growth, employment, trends, and inflation, the central bank said. Powell's comments were consistent with his remarks at the congressional hearing last week, the Fed said. On Twitter, Trump said the meeting was good and cordial. Here is the tweet from Trump. Just finished a very good and cordial meeting at the White House with Jay Powell of the Federal Reserve. Everything was discussed, including interest rates, negative interest, low inflation, easing, dollar strength, and its effect on manufacturing, trade with China, EU, and others, etc. Now, I'm glad that he did let us know about the topics, but that's a wide range. What were those topics? I would love to have been a fly on the wall in that room. In separate meetings with panels on Capitol Hill last week, Powell said he felt that monetary policy was appropriate and likely to hold steady unless there are some significant changes in the economic outlook. In addition, he said several times that Fed policy is not influenced by political considerations. That is a key point considering that Trump has been vocal in his criticism of the Fed, saying that interest rate increases in 2018 were not necessary and that the central bank has been too slow to ease policy this year. And so here is the statement from the Fed. At the president's invitation, Chair Powell met with the president and the Treasury Secretary Monday morning at the White House to discuss the economy, growth, employment, and inflation. Chair Powell's comments were consistent with the remarks at his congressional hearings last week. He did not discuss his expectations for monetary policy, except to stress that the path of policy will depend entirely on the incoming information that bears on the outlook for the economy. Finally, Chair Powell said that he and his colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee will set monetary policy as required by law to support maximum employment and stable prices, and will make those decisions based solely on careful, objective, and non-political analysis. Now, that sounds good. However, it should be noted that a lot of the data that they use to set their policy is revised upwards or downwards from time to time. And some people could come to question the validity of that data, and perhaps some of those numbers might be tweaked in order to politicize or make decisions one way or the other. So I think it's pretty clear. I think even folks on both sides will agree, can possibly agree that Donald Trump wants the Fed to do what he wants them to do, which is not uncommon. So just as in the 2016 election, he complained that the Fed was too political, and I cheered that comment in that debate. However, he is wanting to politicize the Fed from his viewpoint. I don't think that's good, but it's not unusual for any president. He is just more open about it. CNBC has reached out to the White House for additional comment. This is not the first time Powell and Trump have met. The two had dinner together in February in a meeting at the White House characterized as including a very good exchange of views. Not that they necessarily agreed on the views, but nonetheless. And what the important thing about the Federal Reserve and what they do is it influences the economy, it influences the devaluation of the dollar, and make no mistake, that's what's happening. They are managing the ever-declining dollar in terms of its spending value. Not its strength. There's a difference about the strength of the dollar compared to its its declining value, which is targeted at 2% every year. Moving on, however, Trump has been unrelenting in his criticism since then, at one point calling the Fed officials boneheads for not cutting interest rates more aggressively. Trump appointed Powell as Fed chair in February 2018 as a successor to Janet Yellen. It's common practice for Fed chairs and presidents to meet, though Trump's bashing of the Fed is unusual in how public it has become. Previous presidents were known to try to influence rates, but rarely were they as open about it. Yellen and former President Barack Obama, for instance, met in April 2016, but reportedly did not even discuss interest rates. Well, it probably didn't need to, because they're ideologically joined at the hip, both Keynesian, so they probably didn't need to discuss any of that. Probably just asked, well, hey, how's your granddaughter? What about those dancing lessons? You know, probably a typical conversation that maybe a former attorney general and a former president may have had on a certain tarmac, on a certain airport, on a certain airplane some time ago. I would not anticipate that, even at this confidential setting, that the president would have a conversation with the chair of the Fed that would undermine her ability to make these kinds of critical monetary policy decisions independently. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said before the meeting, according to USA Today report at the time. Of course, he can say that with very much confidence, for sure. President Richard Nixon, though, reportedly used behind-the-scenes arm twisting to get his Fed chairman, Arthur Burns, to lower rates heading into the 1972 election. And that doesn't surprise me at all, considering kind of the personality that Richard Nixon had. And my guess is President Johnson probably have even more behind-the-scenes arm twisting. That's not talked about here. You know, the Federal Reserve is important. And, you know, considering President Donald Trump's promises or his complaints about the Federal Reserve and what they do, and his attractiveness to gold, really, in general, you know, there's a part of the swamp that's just more difficult, I think, to uproot. And, you know, this is a swamp that happens to be in the private sector. It is a private institution, probably much harder to dismantle or to overturn or what have you. All you can do is appoint, you know, a Fed chair that is fair and equitable. And but my guess is, and the takeaway from this is probably both sides are wrong in their assertions, in my guess, and especially the Federal Reserve Fed Chair Jerome Powell, as far as being independent and non-political. I believe they are political even today, in some form or another. Maybe not as much so as Janet Yellen, but I do believe there are to a point. I don't believe they should have raised those interest rates. Maybe not as much. And I believe that they should just leave things alone, you know? They shouldn't be lowering them either, in my view. There's too much involvement by government entities or entities sanctioned by the government. And, you know, and this is going to only hurt this with these going on behind-the-scene repurchasing agreements and the like, and quantitative easing. I mean, Donald Trump wants the Fed to go negative in the interest rates. So, you know, that kind of thing, and quantitative easing, I think he's even been somewhat open to that. That's what got us in trouble, or, well, some people will say it saved us from the Keynesian side, but in reality, it just kicked the can down the road, and meanwhile, it greatly hurt the confidence of the dollar, and I believe that's part of the reason why some of these nations are accumulating more gold. And because they see, you know, this is not going to end well for the dollar if we keep going the way we're going. And that analysis and that truth is something that people have been predicting for quite some time. Can't tell you when that will happen. But the more we print money and the more we do things to upset the stability of the dollar and the faith in it, it's going to come to a conclusion where it'll either have to be reset, and in that reset it will be revalued, or it'll just sneak up and potentially collapse. That's not out of the realm of possibility, even though I'm not one of the mind of someone who would necessarily fall into an economic collapse scenario or a doom and gloomer by any stretch. I think that's highly unlikely, but hubris can get in the way of some of these officials, including our president, I believe. And so we have to be careful. And but regardless of what the politicians and the bankers do, you and I know what we should be doing and what we can do to save ourselves from such catastrophes if they were to happen, no matter what side of the aisle you fall. Because there are folks on my channel who are Keynesians, who believe in that economic theory, or those of us who believe in supply-side economics, the free markets. You know, I think all of us can agree that this new monetary policy, which is nothing new at all, it's completely the same rehash of the same old thing that every nation around the world, first world nation, is doing right now, easing and quantitatively and cutting interest rates dramatically. You know, that kind of thing can only go on for so long. They're going to run out of tools. So we hold gold and silver to protect ourselves. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. We'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to all of you for taking the time to watch this video. Hope you will come back tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, because I do post videos every single day. And I want to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.